my talk today is, I'm going to give you kind of the overview of what Made in Space is doing, but I wanted to focus it more on, how this can help you guys. I figured, most of you are here because you want to build experiments to fly in microgravity and hopefully get that, to an ultimate mission that flies on station or maybe, somewhere else. And so I think my story actually will help you guys understand that whole process. So to start the story, I just want to kind of let you guys know, overview, very soon there's going to be a much cheaper way to get your hardware onto the ISS, and that's what kind of I'm going to be talking about. And the reason I'm making this clear from the beginning is I want you guys to be thinking about when you're designing experiments and missions and ultimately products that you're going to put in space, think about it with the future in mind. What, in the next 5 years, how is space changing and how do you take advantage of that? And I think what we're doing at Made in Space really will help you understand how you could take advantage of the idea of manufacturing space or taking advantage of what we're doing. So with that said, the story of what Made in Space is actually goes back to 1999 at Marshall Space Flight Center. And back then in the 90s, there was a group at the Advanced Manufacturing Lab at Marshall that was kind of very future focused. They were thinking about how do we make humans that are in space less dependent on Earth? And one of the things that they very quickly understood was, well, if they could manufacture in space, in their space stations, it would reduce dependency a great deal, because it's hard to get things into space. If you have emergency situations, Apollo 13 was a great example. If they had the ability to manufacture the connector for their filter, the score filter into the round hole, maybe they would have solved that problem quicker. So there's actually a group that in the Advanced Manufacturing Lab that was looking at this, and they had a 3D printer that was a 1999 version of 3D printers. They were not very advanced at that time, and they took it into a microgravity flight. So this was the first time 3D printing was tested in microgravity, and it's a Stratasys printer. Oops. So that's the same brand that makes the top of the line FDM printers today, Stratasys. This was their early version of that, and these guys tested the printer, and they wrote some papers on it. They said, hey, this idea would work. We were able to print parts in space, and their findings said, well, the obvious next step is to put it on the space station. The problem is this is what the space station looked like back in 1999. It wasn't more than the Russian command module made it to the Unity node. So the idea was very premature. The technology wasn't ready yet. The space station wasn't even ready yet. It was hardly even being constructed at that point. But they recognized that this day would come that we needed to do this. So, so it took 2 decades, and obviously 3D printing has changed a lot. I think, raise your hand if you've heard of 3D printing before. Everybody, right? So keep your hands up if you've heard of 3D printing in the 90s. A few people, right? Not many people knew about it in the 90s. The technology wasn't ready yet. But it changed, the game changed just like less than a decade ago when Stratasys patent expired. And there's a lot of other reasons that 3D printing has exploded, but this was a big one. This is why there's literally dozens of different 3D printers on Kickstarter. There's a new one every day. It's because the patent for how to make these went away, and then we saw this explosion in growth. So it was around 2010 that Made in Space was started with this idea. Oh, I actually jumped ahead. So more recent news. I mean, it's getting the idea of 3D printing is getting a lot of press. The president mentioned it in his State of the Union address. He said that 3D printing has the potential to revolutionize the way we make almost everything. Shortly after that, Charlie Bolden, the NASA administrator, came out and said, endorsed 3D printing and said somewhere down the road we'll launch nothing except an additive manufacturing set of machines, and we'll build everything that we need when we get there. So it was with these ideas, this is actually more recent than the forming of Made in Space, but it was with these ideas that Made in Space was formed back in 2010 with the idea of bringing manufacturing to space. We recognized that this idea came from in the 90s when NASA started talking about it, and that it kind of faltered, and we wanted to pick up where they left off. So since we formed, I'm happy to announce that, keep going the wrong way. Okay, so these were our first 3 original objectives. We announced these back when we started the company. It was to perform experiments in microgravity, to assess the technology readiness level of 3D printing. So we knew that in the 90s it was claimed to be ready, but we wanted to make sure on our own, reproduce those results and show they would work. After that, we wanted to basically design and adapt 3D printing machines to work in microgravity. And then from there on, we wanted to take these to the space station to do what the group at Marshall had said that they wanted to do in the 90s and actually bring manufacturing to space. So for the past 3 years now, we've been working on these goals, and today I'm happy to announce that we're now manifested to fly a 3D printer to the station. This is going to be the first 3D printer to go to space. It's going up in 2014 on a SpaceX rocket. And what's really cool, the fun part of this story is that we actually are partnered with that group at Marshall. So this is part of the Marshall team with our team at Marshall, where we're at one of our last review meetings. So we're helping them make that dream of theirs possible, and in the same time building an industry on top of that. So obviously, I think another neat thing is that what I put at the last bullet point, this is going to mark the first time that humanity is manufactured off Earth. So I think that's a really exciting first. And the whole idea here is ultimately we're going to have a service-based business model on the station. There's going to be a 3D printer there that all of you are going to be able to basically use and design experiments, design your own company around this idea of manufacturing space. I mean, I just heard so many different good ideas from all these other talks today about, where we've gone with science and microgravity and how much more we have to go. Only 270 proteins have been studied throughout the life of the space station. There's millions of them. So imagine what could happen if you had the ability to manufacture and replace your experiment or modify your experiment once it's already up there. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to do here. We're trying to enable entrepreneurs to basically build new markets in space. So that's where we're at, and I wanted to kind of tie this into why you guys should be interested, and that's with the fact that this all got started when we, back in 2010, when we wanted to fly these printers on zero gravity flights. So we actually started with a contract with NASA to test our 3D printers in microgravity, and we're actually flying another campaign at the end of this month. So hopefully there's enough time at the end of this for you guys to ask some questions, because what I wanted to get across is we've flown over, personally I've flown about 320 parabolas. Through the company we've flown over 400 parabolas, which equates to over 2 hours of total zero gravity time on our machines. We'll get another 40 minutes or so at the end of this month. So I've really experienced the zero gravity environment a lot, and I really understand how to adapt to it. So I always love to show this picture because this is like my favorite thing to do on the zero gravity airplane, and they kind of get mad if you, when there's all these experiments around, you're not supposed to have so much fun. But so you always have to be holding on to something. They never say you can't go upside down, they just say you have to be holding on. So every time we would get into zero gravity, I would always just flip myself upside down, because the neat thing is that when you're in zero gravity, there's no such thing as down anymore. There's like the whole idea of down goes away, and basically down is whatever you want it to be. So when you flip upside down and you look down the length of the plane, it just looks like everybody else is upside down. And it's really weird. It doesn't feel any different for you to be upside down. It's not like if you stood on your hands in Earth gravity and the blood rushes to your head. It doesn't feel any different. Everybody else just looks funny. And it's weird to look at an airplane from upside down. So I like to do that a lot. And the other neat thing is you don't need to design experiments with down in mind. So this actually helped me to be upside down, because we had our experiment box had 2 layers. We had printers up here and printers down here. So a lot of times we had to look at the printer down here where we were doing a lot of our work. And you could either lay down on the ground, or you could just flip upside down and just get your head down there to take a peek. So let me just go over kind of the details of our experiment. And I think this might be the only slide that's hard to read, so I'll try to read it out to you guys. So we had pretty basic test objectives. We wanted to validate extrusion-based 3D printing in microgravity, that's fused deposition modeling. Basically characterize the performance and accuracy of the process with a variety of different manufacturing machines. So we flew a lot of off-the-shelf printers. We also flew a lot of printers we designed on our own to test how each one worked differently. We ended up finding that out of all the printers we tested, the commercial printers actually didn't work as is. So this was an interesting finding from the original Marshall test in the 90s. All these printers that were off the shelf had little problems. You know, they're inherently designed with gravity in mind. So gravity holds things in place. Gravity makes sure that things don't just have little fluctuations and float around. So we learned how to design a more rugged machine. And that's what that entire summer of 2011 doing these flights turned out to be. So we built several parts, and we were analyzing those for layer-to-layer resolution, tolerances, structural strengths, really characterizing the whole 3D printing process in microgravity compared to what happens on the ground. And overall, like I said earlier, we did 400 plus parabolas. That equates to about 2 hours of zero gravity manufacturing time on our printers. The picture shown here is just kind of an example of, this was a part before we modified a commercial printer where you could see the column just warps out a little, and then after we modified it, we get a nice consistent column, just demonstrating that we could get a printer to work just as well in zero gravity as it did on the ground. Okay, so this is a slide I really wanted to get across to you guys, and hopefully we can just jump to questions after this. Just my basic lessons learned. I bet there's probably more once you ask me questions. I already heard this one, a couple people said today, automate everything. Totally true. The first time I ever flew in microgravity was back in college. I was doing an experiment on soldering in microgravity, figuring out how to get solder to hold down to the board without gravity in place. And I didn't not automate a single thing on that experiment. So I had this glove box, and I had to have my hands in it. I was like basically laying on the floor, glued to a window, looking in there, soldering. And the thing is that after, they give you meds so that you don't get sick. But when you're glued to this window and you're not paying attention, you're not looking far away the whole time, it's just a matter of time until you get nauseous. So I think we had, it was like a 40 parabola flight. I got about 25 parabolas in before I realized I needed to take a break. And basically I never got sick, but I did stop doing my experiments so I didn't get sick. And so that I only got 25 parabolas out of the 40 during that flight. So it was that moment that I realized to automate everything. During college, I went on to mentor other students who were building experiments. We always automated it. On this one, it was pretty easy since we've got these robotic manufacturing systems that basically are automated. So for us, all we had to do was get our experiment set up. They give you about maybe 10 minutes. The plane's still, reaching cruising altitude, and they tell you to get out of your seat. You're running up the plane, and you can tell the plane's going like this. And you're setting everything up. You got about 10 minutes to set up your whole experiment. And then after that, you don't want to have to get into your experiment, because if you get into your experiment, then they have to stop all the parabolas. So if you have a problem, everybody else gets mad at you because every minute that they have to let you fix it is a minute that you don't get to do a parabola. So automate everything. We did that. We had cameras trained on every single printer so that we captured video in real time. And then we were also just monitoring ourselves and making our own notes as we went along. And that's what the second point is about, is collect data during the flight. So we did that with video. We videotaped the printing process, and that was something we learned a lot from afterwards. We were able to go back and watch the video and understand why was the printer doing what it was doing. And the reason I put this in there is I really recommend having some sort of data that you can walk away from the flight with. So if all your data is only useful if you have to take a sample back to the lab and then analyze it, there's so many things that could happen between collecting that data on the flight and getting back to the lab. And if you don't want to depend on those type of circumstances. Interesting one, point 3, what we found kind of the hard way is that a lot of digital cameras and some laptops even have these automatic shutoffs when they think they're being dropped. So when you're in microgravity, these cameras think that they're being dropped. And We had a couple cameras the first flight that didn't capture any video because every time it went in microgravity, they just turned off. So we ended up buying new cameras during that first flight week, and we were in the hotel room like tossing them up and letting them land on the bed just to make sure they wouldn't go off. So that's definitely a big tip to make sure. I think the camera we got ended up having a feature that you could turn off, that turn off feature. So make sure you get one of those. Design your experiment with as little setup time as needed. I don't know how it will work with the suborbital spacecrafts, but I know with flying on the zero-G airplane, and flying with the reduced gravity office at Johnson, they don't give you much time to set up. You get maybe 30 minutes before the flight takes off to go get everything set up. But in between that 30 minutes of time, you're in the briefing room getting they're literally injecting scopolamine into your veins to make you not get sick. And then 5 minutes after they inject scopolamine into your veins, you're very loopy. Your inner ear is completely turned off, so every little bit of head movement you feel dizzy. So, I found that I was completely useless after they did that until I got on the plane. Once you're on the plane, you got adrenaline rushing, and you kind of forget about the fact that they pumped you up with all these drugs. But just set it up so it's really easy to get going, and then make your experiment easily accessible, not just for on the flight. I mean, but also just repairs at any time. But I know for us, basically they give you 20 parabolas, and then you have this straight and level period, maybe 3 minutes where the plane flies level, so that anybody that needs to fix their experiment, replace a sample or whatever, can do it. So we found that for us, every time we got that straight and level, we were opening up our experiment box, taking out printed parts, getting the printer started again. And it was really important that we made it super easy to just get in there, get things set, and get out. And then also at the end of the flight day, a lot of times we're actually pushing these 3D printers until they failed. That was how we learned a lot about what worked and what didn't. So we need to be able to get in there, remove printers, replace parts. So it was really important to just make it easily accessible. And then also not to have lots of nuts and bolts you have to take out and lay down, because they are very, very big on not having foreign object debris in the plane. And basically the plane has these padded floor mats everywhere, and it's so easy for things to just get stuck under there, and then you get in zero gravity and they start floating around and they get angry. So keep that in mind. Test early, test often. That leads into fail early, fail often. This is just kind of the mantra across Made in Space, but it's, iterate as quickly as possible. Don't wait till the week before your experiment flies to be doing the final tests on it. Build your experiment as early as you can and start testing it and understand how to make it better. And that just leads into the whole fail early, fail often mentality. And then, the last one, it may seem obvious to design your experiment to raise the technology readiness level, basically with a path towards flying an actual mission. But a lot of the experiments I've seen over the time that I've been doing this don't really have this ultimate goal of how does this actually lead into flying a mission. A lot of times it's let's do science so we can write a journal paper, which is good, but I'd be much happier to see you guys create experiments that lead into building a product or a service or something that advances this industry forward. That's what I'm all about. So I think that's it. Is there time for questions if anybody has any? I don't know how that went.